man to fish. You've heard the old adage. Learn skills to get yourself free. Get your kicks by getting.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the shop. It's another Wednesday, another live stream, and this time I am going to be talking about sharpening weird stuff. I put this question out to on my Patreon account. It just said, look, what's on your mind, guys? And several people brought up the idea of sharpening, but not sharpening the weird stuff. So I'm going to talk a little bit about like smoothing plane camber. I have talked about that in the past on a video called Eliminating Plane Tracks, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how I maintain that camber. So once you create the camber, what do you do like when it's time to resharpen? But then we're going to go down the rabbit hole of weird tools. I want to focus heavily on molding planes because I do think that's something that more and more people are getting into, and more people are like, what the heck do I do with this blade? Skewed irons is kind of a good place to start, kind of a gateway drug, if you will, to weird irons. And I say that because there are jigs out there to allow you to sharpen skewed irons, but really this is a great opportunity to hone, forgive the pun, hone your freehand sharpening skills. Because once you start moving into molding plane irons and carving gouges and pattern makers gouges and other weird stuff, that's all freehand. Yeah, there are systems out there that have all kinds of crazy jigs to allow you to sharpen things. Tormek is one of them, but I have yet to figure out a way to sharpen a concave blade profile on a Tormek. Maybe there's a way, I don't know. I don't think so. Eventually, these techniques become free-handed, whether you're taking the blade to the stone or taking the stone or whatever the abrasive media is to the blade. These are all freehand techniques, and skewed blades are a great way to start getting more comfortable with freehand. So I am going to start with a skewed blade. I happen to have my shooting plane blade that does need a touch-up right now. Of course, there's that little ad at the bottom. As I said, the show is really it's brought to you by my patrons. These topics are straight from people who've sponsored this show. I'm always welcome to answer questions, and by all means, people in the chat room ask questions. I will be answering them, but you know, patrons help shape the show. So if you're interested, there you go. But there's my ad for the day. I'm gonna get that out of here. Couple of important things first. This is philosophy of sharpening, if you will, my philosophy of sharpening. Everything I do is freehand now. But those of you who have seen me sharpen any amount of time or heard me talk about sharpening will know that I can't talk about sharpening without talking about the strop. I've got lots of them. I've got one hanging on my joinery bench. I've got two right here, and I've got another one hanging out over here on the back of my tool cabinet. I live and die by the strop. I firmly believe that I can keep my blades sharp, razor sharp, for a long period of time by stropping more often. There is a process called dubbing, that is almost a four-letter word, where the edge does get rounded over time. The key factor here is over time. If you are sharpening your blades as per normal, maybe, you know, or honing your blades. Let's be clear here. Honing is refinement of that edge. We'll call sharpening a more coarse activity. If you're honing your blades on a regular basis, and in a typical shop session, say it's a weekend and I'm able to get, you know, 6-8 hours in the shop, that's a long time. I will stop and hone a blade several times during the course of that session. If I'm doing a lot of milling, I may strop and hone my 4-plane blade 3 and 4 times. But I'm going straight to the strop to do that. I'm not going back to my stones. Eventually, that dubbing effect does occur, and you do need to go back to the stones and kind of hit the reset button on the edge. But really, I'm going back to like my finest stone, or maybe my next finest stone, my next coarsest stone, I should say, to touch up that edge, and then I'm good to go. And then I continue to strop and strop and strop and strop and strop, sometimes for weeks and months on end of regular usage. The reason I bring that up is once we start talking about these odd blades, molding plane irons, especially things like complex molding plane irons, like this thumbnail plane or this ovalo plane, these do not get used very much. In fact, the way to cut an ovalo is 95% with a rabbet plane, and then like the last 4 passes with the ovalo plane. So I can sharpen an ovalo plane and it will stay razor sharp for 6 months, maybe a year. It really depends on how much you use it. Are you sticking ovalos on every single project? If you are, even then, it's not getting that much use. So if I strop this ovalo blade, and then I continue to strop it for the next 3 years, have I significantly dubbed that edge? Probably not, because I'm not stropping these blades like even a fraction of the amount that I would be stropping like my jack plane blade or my 1/2 inch chisel or my 3/4 inch chisel. These are the tools that are seldom used. So the point of this whole thing is to tell you that once you've got the blade sharp, stay away from the stones. All of the continual maintenance of your molding plane irons, of your carving gouges, can be done using a strop. And while I'm not going to deny that there is that thing called dubbing, it takes so flippin' long for that to kick in. If you are a professional carver and all you do is carve all day long, even then, I find a lot of professional carvers are stropping for weeks at a time before they go back to a stone and freshen up an edge. The strop will extend the life of a blade and keep it very durable for an extremely long period of time. So today I am going to talk about sharpening these weird irons and how I would go about it when it's too far gone for a strop. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how I use the strop to kind of take that sharpened iron to the next level of sharpness. And then that same process is used repeatedly for months on end to maintain that edge. And that's the key, I think, with any blade, whether it's weirdly shaped blades or regular straight blades. The more often that you hone that blade, the less overall time you end up sharpening. If you let that blade get so dull that you've now got to go back to your stones, now you're doing more surgery. It might be outpatient surgery, but this is applying a Band-Aid as compared to outpatient surgery, as compared to when you drop it on the floor and put a ding in it and now you're into like open heart surgery, using a grinder and things like that. I'm not going to use a grinder at all today, other than to say, if you have to reshape an iron, say you bought an ovalo plane, a vintage ovalo plane, and you get the sole trued up nice and flat. And then what you do is you set the blade in and you set the wedge and you trace the profile of the sole onto the iron. And you see, is it mismatched? And 9 times out of 10, it's a little bit mismatched. Now I've got to go to the grinder in order to shape that iron back to my line so that the shape of the iron matches the shape of the sole. Then it's a matter of refining that bevel and getting it to a sharp edge to the point where it can now take a cut. I use that sharpened blade to take a cut and I put it into a dense hardwood, something like hard maple, or in this instance, what is this? This is hornbeam. Yeah, really dense material. And what I do is I end up sticking those profiles onto this block. I've got a side bead over here, and I've got 2 sizes of ovalos on this side. And then I use stropping compound, chromium oxide crayon, to essentially turn this into a strop. A strop doesn't just have to be leather. A strop can be any material, really. And these perfectly match the profiles of the 2 ovalo planes that I use the most and the side bead that I use the most. I actually need to flip this over and put another side bead profile on here for my 1/8 inch bead that I use all the time. You know, I could rip this in half and put more profiles. You can end up putting 4 different profiles in each corner, and you've got a stropping board for your most commonly used planes. I've been using this stropping board for several years, and the ovalo, this one and this one that I use all the time, I have yet to do anything to these blades but strop them. This is a plane made by Caleb James, so it came to me already well. The iron was well shaped and it was honed and it was ready to go. So I've never had to put this on a stone. All I've done is stropped it time and time and time again. And I actually use this a fair bit, but I've never had to do anything other than that. So I hope I've made that point, I beat that horse dead. these specific irons just do not get enough use to need anything other than a strop. I think we'll just say, I've got a lot of carving gouges now, but let's say I have 50 different profiles of carving gouges. That's probably a bit high, but just for the sake of, for this conversation, let's say I have 50 gouges, and I have probably used 4 of them, sharpened 4 of them on a stone. The rest of them have all been done with a strop. And we're talking 10 years of collecting these carving gouges. So strop, 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 very good thing to have. So with that in mind, I just showed you this hardwood block. When you've restored a plane and you've got it cutting, stick an edge into something nice and dense and hard, and then use that as your strop from there on. It's a custom made strop. You can do the same thing with regular hollows and rounds. I prefer to use it for complex edges because, well, they're quite complex. This is a stropping board. This is a Butts stropping board. I got this at Woodcraft, I don't know, a decade or so ago. Nice thin leather, you know, nice flat face here, flat face here. I've got a rounded edge on this side. I've got an angled edge and a very, very tight radius on this side. This tight radius is perfect for reaching inside a V-gouge, a carving V-gouge. And that's exclusively what I use this for stropping off the burr inside a V-gouge. I can actually use these flat faces for the outer faces of the V-gouge and for the keel of the V-gouge as well. But this is great for all kinds of chip carving knives, spoon knives, sloyd knives, etc. I like it because it's just real easy to hold it. I like to actually take the tool to the wood. So here is a sloyd knife. Here I like to, well, actually this sloyd knife has a nice low bevel on it, but I like to kind of hold it up real high so that, and I take this handle, I like to grab the strap itself. I take the handle, press it into my chest, and I can pull. And just as I come, you know, I'm twisting to get down to the tip, but the tip, you can see obviously it's tapered. As I twist around to that tip, just a slight lifting of my hand keeps that tapered tip in contact. And because it's up real close, sometimes you can even hold it up on edge like this. You can really make sure you're matching that contour. Now the key is I'm holding the strap, but my fingers are not wrapped around it. They're not in the way of the blade. They're holding it by the fingertips underneath. This is great. You can also do this down on the bench relatively easily as long as you continue to pull. The key with a sloyd knife, obviously, is you've got to do both sides and you've got to keep that bevel even. You know, if you do a whole bunch of stropping on one side, you can get that bevel slightly out of whack. But this strop is particularly good for stuff like this because you can hold it up, you can hold it down, you can hold it at an angle. There's all kinds of really nice ways for it. And this, I think, primarily was meant to be a carving strop, and that's really what it gets used for a lot. This is a horse butt leather strop that basically lives on my workbench. This is daily use for just about all of my blades. All my plane blades and chisels get used on that. This is some thicker leather that I specifically have not mounted to a board because I can bend it, and I can use that to adhere to the contours of a blade. So I have a round blade right here that I can very easily take the blade, press it into the leather, and just pull it. Now I've got my hand kind of on the back of the leather and it's acting kind of supporting the bottom of this curve. And I can just pull it right through there. And I'm stropping that edge perfectly. And here again, this is not a take the tool to the leather, but more the leather to the tool. And I'm holding it right up in front of my face so I can actually see that bevel angle and match it. But due to the flexibility of this leather, the fact that I can curve it, but also just as I push into it, I'm conforming to it, I will strop that entire edge. Now, there's a greater chance of increased dubbing effect because this is a little bit softer leather. And as I'm pushing into it, it's kind of squeezing around the edge and it can act to round over that tip. But the abrasive on this is so fine that it's still going to take a really, really long time to do this. And that little bit of stropping actually has produced a burr on the back side. I always like to flip it over to the smooth side and remove that burr And this round iron is ready to go. And if I hold this up to the light and just kind of angle it back and forth, there's zero reflection on the tip. And that's the question. If you want to know, is my blade sharp or do I need to sharpen? Hold it up or backlight it, or hold it so that you've got light shining down on the blade and just angle it back and forth. You should see zero reflection on the edge. Essentially, it's like absence of light. It's like you've got a tiny little black hole on your edge. It's sucking in all the light, because the perfect sharp edge is that perfect intersection of two faces. There is a 0 degree radius at that point. So if there's 0 degrees, there's nothing with which to catch and reflect the light. And you'll see it very easily. If you see the slightest bit of white reflection on the edge, there's a flat spot there that needs to be taken care of. Because I was able to strop this and run my finger on the back and just feel a burr there, I've covered the edge all the way. And now with no reflection, actually this is ready to go. But here's a good example. This is a plane, this is my number 12 round. This is a plane that I use pretty frequently. And how I maintain it is what you just saw. A couple of seconds on the strop, and that's it. If I were to drop this, fortunately I've got rubber tile flooring, it really probably wouldn't hurt it. But if I were to go a very, very long time on this, I would have to go back to the stone. So the more you keep up with your maintenance, you see just how bloody simple it is with a flexible strop like that. So I've beat that to death, haven't I? So that being said, let's start with a skewed iron and kind of talk about, wait a minute, what am I doing? I have a skewed plane, not a skewed iron. Let me get a skewed iron. Silly person. Well, I need to sharpen that one anyway. This plane has always been tight. One of these days I'm going to have to do something. I'm hesitant to do anything because it's what's tight is the tang in the mortise here, which makes it actually quite easy to adjust because there's so much positive registration there. But one of these days I feel like it's going to freeze in place and I'm going to have trouble. So here is a skewed iron, and this is actually a little bit, you might say even a little bit harder to sharpen than your typical skewed iron because it has this little flagged tang on it, so there's not much to grab onto. I have some larger skewed blades. Actually, do I? Well, yeah, I've got my Veritas blade. I think that may be the only other one I have that's skewed. Everything else I have is a flagged blade like this. But these are perfect examples of what learning how to freehand can be. Before I do that, Mirko, if you have a plane that you don't know what it's for, reach out to me on Instagram. Send a picture on Instagram, or you could even try to put a comment in the show or something. Do you place any stock in the difference between strops made from cowhide, bison, horses? No, I don't. It's all leather. I mean, maybe there is, but I haven't experimented enough, nor do I really care to experiment enough. I've got several different kinds of leather here in my shop, and they all work just fine. And I can't see that there's any significant difference between them to care. So easy answer, no. I don't place any significance in the type of leather. So skewed irons, again, they're jigs for honing guides that can hold it at that specific skew angle. The thing about a skewed iron is there's more surface area here than there is on a typical flat iron because we've got this angle. You know, the distance straight across here is shorter than the angle. The hypotenuse, in other words, is a little bit longer. Plus, because of that, I tend to do all of my freehand sharpening if I'm using a straight blade. If I'm using a straight blade on here, I will skew it anyway while I'm freehanding, because what that does is gives me more surface area as I'm pulling the blade towards me. If I'm just holding it, you know, parallel to the stone, as I pull the blade towards me, the bevel can rock a little bit more. If I skew it, I essentially can't rock it back. It's almost like I've created training wheels or an outrigger that holds it in place. And that's just how I sharpen all of my blades. This guy essentially does that for me, and it's a nice ergonomic grip. Instead of me having to hold a straight iron at an angle, this already wants to be held at an angle in order for that bevel to match. I've also got a pretty wide bevel here, and I think also the key with any freehand sharpening is lots and lots of lubricant, whatever you use on the stone, because it increases that suction that you get. So it's real easy to feel that click in place. And just for reference, this particular iron has not been ground on a grinder. It's not hollow ground, in other words. It is a flat grind. So yes, a hollow ground helps that kind of clicking into place, but this, because of that extra lubricant, it really is very easy to feel that. And the thing that I think a lot of people struggle with freehand sharpening is they get so focused on holding everything perfectly straight, and they grip it real tight, and they get real tense in their arms, their forearms, and their shoulders. And really, the lighter the grip you have, the more you can feel that bevel kind of suctioning down onto the stone. If you're gripping it really hard, whatever plane that your body moves in is the plane that that blade is going to follow. But if you take a nice light grip and just don't interrupt that suction onto the stone, just move it back and forth, you'll find that it feels really stable because it's just sticking to there. Now, if this stone were to dry out, if I didn't put any lubricant on it, you're going to lose that surface tension created by the lubricant. This is why I think a lot of people tend to gravitate toward oil stones, because that oil as a lubricant tends to be even kind of stickier in this process. I haven't really found any problems with using water either. Somebody asked in Patreon why I made the switch to diamond stones. And frankly, it's just lower maintenance. Plus, I like to do kind of a sideways sharpening that I'll show you guys in a minute that can very easily run a groove into a water stone, and I just don't want to deal with that. The side-to-side sharpening method can be quite effective, where now I'm specifically standing perpendicular to the long axis of this stone, and you kind of freeze your body from the ankles up, and you just do this little side-to-side sway. You ever been to a 5th grade dance? And you just stand there scared to death to put your arms around her waist, and you just kind of shuffle side to side, back and forth. The 5th grade dance shuffle, that's what the side-to-side sharpening method is. And you can go into that same line on the stone and we very easily wear a groove in there. Now, I've long ago pulled up a burr on the back of this blade, because I've been standing here talking while I'm doing all this. So I can just wipe off the... It's a good practice to wipe off the blades from stone to stone just to prevent cross-contamination, but even then I find that tends to be a little overstated, especially in diamond stones. Water stones are much more friable, meaning they're breaking apart. There's much more grit in the swarf. There's not really that much, there's no grit coming off this stone. There is metal swarf coming off. So now I'm going to, actually, let's just wipe off that burr so I don't mistake the burr that's there with the one that I just created. Now, same thing again. Let that, you can even just lift it up, lift the blade up, and you'll feel it kind of click into place because of that excess lubricant there. Once you get it in place, just relax. Relax. There should be no white knuckles in here. And just move the blade back and forth. And just let that suction occur. Because I've got this nice wide bevel here, and because I don't have to deal with a guide, or a honing guide or anything like that, I can move around, or I can move in circles. There are some blades, or just some days, where I just feel more comfortable moving around in a circle than moving back and forth. And you can really actually pull up a burr very quickly, I find, with the circular method. If you're feeling really fancy, you can do figure 8 methods. I find that actually throws you off more than anything, because the change of direction. But no honing guide gives you that ability with a nice light grip to just let the the bevel glide over the tool. It's really easy, and you will find that if you're freaked out about freehand sharpening, grab yourself, there's a nice burr, grab yourself a skewed iron and just get a feel for it this way. And this blade is good to go. I can strop it, and you can think of a strop as kind of a way to increase the grit that you just used. So, and you know, I've heard all kinds of things. You know, the strop triples the last grit you used. Whether or not that's accurate or not, just think of it. Let's just say for sake of this conversation, it does actually triple it. So if whatever that grit was, and again, Diamond Stones is open to debate. That's supposedly an 8,000 grit stone. Who knows? Let's just call it an 8,000 grit stone. Technically, stropping this takes it to 24,000 grit. Is that fair? I don't know. I don't really care. I'm not one that gets obsessed over the grit. Again, a sharp edge, you can get a sharp edge on the concrete because all you're doing is grinding to that 0 point radius. Now, a sharp edge ground on concrete on a very coarse surface will not be very durable because you've got deep scratches and you don't have a unified blade. The finer and finer you go in grits, the smaller those scratches are, so the more durable the edge is. I often describe this as a series of fingers. If I have grounded on, 80 grit, I've got each one of these fingertips is super sharp, but the area between the fingertips is deep scratches. And as I go to a finer grit, those scratches get a little bit smaller, finer and finer and finer and finer until I end up with no deep scratches, and I end up with a more unified edge, a solid edge instead of a bunch of little fingers. So that solid edge, of course, is going to be more durable. When you've got independent fingers, well, one finger can bend down, another one can bend down, or whatever. It causes weakness in the blade. If they're all unified, the blade is going to last a lot longer. So sharp is done at any grit. Honing to higher grits makes the edge more durable, aka means you can plane longer without having to stop and start over. So technically, this edge is ready to go. I mean, it was honed on that finest grit stone, but I can come over to the strop. Now here, I'm putting a lot more pressure down, but because of the pliability of the strop, I don't really have to worry too much about the bevel angle. I am certainly feeling the bevel angle, but just naturally in the body mechanics, as I pull back, there's every chance that I'm creating a slightly convex edge. I'm slightly pulling up, but what that also is ensuring that I'm getting right to that edge and drawing up a burr, which you might be able to see. That's pretty fine, but one of the reasons I flip it over and go to the other side is I can actually see that little bit of burr that I just pulled off there. So technically, yes, I have increased the grit of this particular iron, but what I've done is just unify those little fingers ever so slightly more. So now I've got a much more durable edge. It's not about the polish. It's not about whether I can see my face in it, and I can. I can see myself. That's great. Nice. Certainly, the more you strop, the more that polish will come up. But that's the other thing. Every time I strop, I'm increasing that polish a little bit more. I'm decreasing the size of those scratches in here and creating a more durable edge. So for me, the strop is a win-win. Any tiny little downside of dubbing is so not important in the grand scheme of things. There were a few questions I saw. That's the big thing about this is if you have a skewed iron, just go sharpen it. Go try it freehand. It's going to be a great place to start for you. Yeah, I do keep threatening to build a new sharpening station. The reason that I haven't yet, honestly, is because I've got so much other stuff stored in this. I've got a lot of electronics, HDMI cables and camera work, stuff that's stored in there. And I know the minute I get rid of it, I'm going to have to build another storage solution for it, which is fine. Yeah. The other thing is it's not a pressing need. This sharpening station works just fine. It just takes up more room than it should. So if it were broken and I couldn't sharpen well, I would have redone it a long time ago. I keep telling myself I should get to it. I've got some plywood to build it over to the side, but it just hasn't happened yet. So one of these days, when I've got absolutely nothing else going on, yeah, right, I will do that and build the sharpening station. I know exactly what I want it to look like, just hasn't happened yet. What to look for in an old hand crank grinder? One that works. I mean, you're going to replace the stone anyway, so pay no attention to the stone. You want to pay attention to the arbor size. Most modern stones, that's a Norton 3X on mine, will come with arbor bushings, inserts to allow you to change the arbor size to match the internal bore of the stone. But even if you've got a really weird arbor, it's something that you can make. You can actually take a block of hardwood and you can match the arbor size, drilling a hole through it, and actually end up creating a circle that will give you a good bushing. I had to do it once on a grinding wheel at the Stepping Stone Museum, and I actually turned it. I turned it to the appropriate diameter. You don't even have to do that. All it has to do is be centered so that it wedges into place. You want to crank it and you want it to feel like it's not slipping. Occasionally the teeth will get worn down or break off, and you find these little hiccups where it actually jumps as you're turning it. Now, if you really try to grind it right away and kind of go from 0 to 60, you might find that it jumps anyway, but a good steady, slow acceleration of the grinding wheel, and it should turn without skipping on you. So as I start turning this, I've got constant pressure all the way around this. The other thing is it requires very little effort to do it. Now, if it seems to be requiring a lot more effort, it might just need some oiling. You might just need to take it apart and clean it. The thing you do have to worry about sometimes, though, when you take them apart, is it can be difficult to get them back together without springing a leak. There is a little oiler patch on top of this that I can drop oil into. First time I took it apart and then I oiled it, it all drained right out the bottom. It didn't go back together cleanly because the, whatever you call it, the rubber, the gasket material was so dry rotted, and once I took it apart, it essentially just fell apart. So I ended up actually using like plumber's washers, a big, I guess you'd call it a toilet gasket. It wasn't a wax ring, but it was just a big rubber washer, and that fixed it up. But the key is, as I start turning, there's no drops, there's no hiccups whatsoever in there. Other than that, I mean, they're so simple. There's really not a whole lot to look for. You know, the key is that if it is frozen and not turning, that it's something that with some cleaning and some lubrication, it will start turning again. Yeah, but again, because they're not that complex, they shouldn't completely freeze in place. You might want to walk away if it's completely frozen. But yeah, this has been a handy one. I've actually got two of them. I've got another one that I want to clean up, which while I'm here talking, the reason I want to add another one is because I have several 1/4 inch wide wheels that are perfect for grinding to a round shape and grinding the inside of hollows. If you ever do need to do surgery on one, that's what I use it for. So this one actually needs to be trued up a little bit right now. All right, I'm going to sharpen this spokeshave blade. And yeah, there's every possibility the autofocus is taking a second to catch up when I move, because my focal length is changing so much on that one camera. So this blade is pretty much sharp. So in this instance, I'm not going to go all the way back to this coarser grit stone. I'm going to go to my finest grit stone. And here again, it's a straight blade, but it's really, really short. This is not going to fit in a honing guide. Now there's all kinds of jigs you can use to attach it to increase the surface area to allow you to put it in a honing guide. But because it's short, it also has much less kind of cantilevered weight sticking out way far and making it hard to hold the bevel. The shorter thing means that it's actually quite easy to hold that bevel. But here again, I've got a straight blade. I'm going to skew it on the iron to act as that little training wheel and lift up and feel that bevel kind of click into place. And here again, I've got another iron that is a flat grind. You don't have to have a hollow grind to do this. Hollow grind certainly makes things a little bit easier. And circular motion, go the other direction, write your name, however you want to do it. Voila, we have a burr. Doesn't take long. Here again, maintenance sharpening. You know, if the blade is really dull, it's going to take more time on the stone to pull up that burr, to bring it back up to that 0 point radius. When the blade is still relatively sharp, you know, maybe it won't cut in grain cleanly, but it still cuts edge grain. You go back to the stone and it takes just a couple of seconds. Moreover, with freehanded, there's really no reason to have to spend any time setting up a jig or any of that stuff. So then I can come back here again. Here, let's use this strop just for fun. I can put it around a bench dog. In case it wasn't obvious, you always pull on a strop, otherwise you will cut the leather. Here again, just like I did before, I'm going to skew it. Now with a shorter blade like this, I do have to kind of reset every time because there's not enough to hang on to be able to hold everything perfectly flat. So I kind of have to, I raise it up and I drop it down onto the bevel and pull back. And there again, there's the burr. Now granted, there's some chromium oxide in there, but the burr is very clearly little black line of steel that's in there. And this guy is ready to go. So the oddities here are the skewed iron and then the really, really short iron. And people struggle with these because they're wanting to use a honing guide. And it makes it difficult when they're typical honing guides. So this is a great opportunity to learn freehand work. These short blades are pretty easy to hang on to and pretty easy to kind of build that freehanded skill. So once you kind of start to have a good feel for the freehanded skill, now comes the fun part where we have to deal with curved shapes. And a smoothing plane is a curved shape. It's just much, much less of a curve than this. So how I maintain the camber on my smoothing plane is I don't. The camber on a smoothing plane is so slight that I can take my cambered iron, go back to my stone and essentially wipe away that camber in like 30 seconds on the stone. Just like you would normally sharpen a flat iron. And if you have a honing guide, just use the honing guide and you essentially flatten out that camber and then you add it again. And that's just a matter of pressure on the corner, take 10 strokes on the corner, 10 strokes on the opposite corner, and then I go midway between the corner and the center of the blade. I take 10 strokes, midway again on the other side, 10 strokes, and that's all that you need to create that camber. So again, watch my video on eliminating plane tracks and you'll see that process and you'll see it actually, go from plane tracks to no plane tracks. But because it's so slight, I don't try to duplicate that. I don't try to replicate that exact curve. I wipe it away by working the stone, essentially the blade flat again, and then adding the camber back. With the strop, that camber is so slight that just by pressing it into the leather, and when I'm stropping, I'm putting a fair amount of pressure down. I'm relying upon the flexibility of that leather. Just pressing it into the leather means the leather will conform to that slight curve. So again, I can strop a smoothing plane camber for months on end before I need to go back, erase it on a stone, and re-add it. But when you've got an edge like this number 12, obviously there is quite a bit of curvature here that we've got to deal with. So let's just assume that we've got to do some work on this. This is going to kill me to do this. This iron is fine. As you saw, I stropped it already and it's nice and sharp. I'm not going to grind it. I'm not going to go that far. But if I were to grind it, if I needed to grind an iron, a molding plane iron, what I'm doing is I'm working to a line. Whether you're using layout fluid or I use a Sharpie marker, and this again comes from setting it into the plane and tracing the profile of I use Sharpie. I paint the black in with Sharpie, or you can go old school and use soot from a candle. And then I use an awl, a really fine point awl, traced along the profile and essentially etch into the back of the blade. So the Sharpie or the soot covers it in black, and then the awl scratches it away to match the profile. So then I come over to my grinder and I essentially just roughly grind it back to that line, getting as close to the line as I can. But here again, it's all free-handed. You know, I've got it set at a bevel angle that I like. Pretty much everything in my shop is ground to 25 degrees, and that's where this is set right now. I grind it back, just free-handing, doing the heavy coarse work back to that line so that it's really, really close. And I mean really close. I try to like split the line. And that's the nice thing about a hand grinder is you've got a fair amount of control on this thing. The grinding wheel itself, you may not be able to see that, is curved. It is a convex surface. So it's only cutting right in the center. So I've got a fair amount of precision as I grind across it, and I can see where the sparks are coming off, and I can just very precisely remove just a hint more steel on the edge and hint more steel in the middle and get it right back to the line. Again, because I don't want to do surgery on this iron, I'm not going to actually show that, but you end up with an iron that may be slightly faceted on the face, but it is roughly to the shape that you want. So now I would go to a coarser grit stone. So this is a double-sided stone. This is fine and extra fine, and then this stone over here is extra, extra fine. I would flip it over to fine. That's really as coarse as I really ever go. And again, if you've gotten really close to your line, and sometimes you can actually like kind of blend the edge. Once you've grind it down to the line, then you can come in and take one swipe. Let me move my fingers here so you can see a little bit better. I'll kind of take one long swipe on the blade, and that will blend the facets into one facet. So what that means is it actually registers on the stone. If you've got a bunch of different facets, it can kind of like click and jump around on the stone a little bit more. It's not the end of the world. If you have a coarser grit stone, it will quickly grind that into one facet. If you really focus on working close to your line on the grinder, doing the heavy lifting with the coarse tool, and then do that blending stroke at the end, you'll find that you don't have to go that coarse on the stone. And all I do here is, again, get some lubricant. The other thing is if you do come straight from the grinding wheel, spray it with whatever your lubricant is and then wipe it off, because you've got a lot of very coarse grit, coarse granules on your blade now. And you really don't want to take that over to the stone, because you'll actually feel them. On a diamond stone like this, you'll hear the grit kind of grinding underneath there, and that can create all kinds of errant scratches. So now I'm going to, can I capture this with it? I don't want my body to be in the way here. Normally what I would do is stand right in front of this, but you can see I'm blocking the camera. But the idea is if I'm doing this, let's do it in short strokes. I would stand right behind it. So essentially my shoulders are square to the work. I'll lift up till I feel that bevel, and I work back and forth. And what's happening is I'm rolling the blade through an arc to capture the whole thing. And if you're uncertain, you can cover the bevel with a Sharpie marker or something like that to see if you're doing this. Works a lot better when I do long strokes. And this is where diamond stones win, because I'm rolling back and forth, and you'll see I'm following the same line down the length of the stone. And that will wear grooves so fast in a water stone. Now, that could be a good thing, because now you've got a stone that is, perfectly set up for this particular iron. For a while, it will eventually, the groove will get to the point where it's not matching anymore. But this is all I have to do, just grinding back and forth. You can actually go kind of in an arc, but I find that it's so much easier if I stand in one point and I just move the stone back and forth, or move the blade back and forth, rather than going straight across, it will actually travel through an arc, just the way our body mechanics are. It's a lot easier, I find, to roll it laterally. And here again, a light grip on the blade allows the suction effect of the lubricant on the stone to just hold that bevel down. And you will find that it's the extreme edges that you tend to miss because you don't actually rock up far enough or don't pull back far enough. The beauty of this is these corners, they don't cut. They should not be cutting. And in fact, if you go too far and you slightly clip that corner off, well, you won't actually clip it off. You'll actually increase the radius slightly. That's not going to be a problem. You know, if it got really, really bad and you were really clipping it off and significantly reducing the width of the iron, that would be a problem. But what you'll find is you want to actually go further than you think you should. Most of the time people stop, and what happens is they're not cutting all over the edge. They're getting like a 16th to the edge, and it's not quite far enough. You really want to the point where I feel like I'm almost tipping up on its side here. That's giving me a burr. And here again, that was my extra fine stone. So I can go from there to the extra, extra fine. I think there's enough here, but more doesn't hurt. Now, because I'm trying to keep my body out of the way of the camera, I'm actually standing a bit off to the side. That's more difficult. By standing off to the side, I'm increasing the lever of my arm, and it makes it a little bit harder to hold it. The closer into the body you can get and the more squared you can be, to the point where the camera angle's on it a little bit too tight, but my elbows are almost like squeezing against my torso here in order to hold my elbows constant, hold them fixed. Now, the difficulty or the problem you may run into is if you're squeezing your elbows to your sides, you might be gripping again too tightly on the blade itself. So watch out for those, white knuckles. If you stand right in front of it, you can actually rock your whole body and do that 5th grade dance move again. That's really nice and controlled. And it's really easy to let the suction hold that bevel right down to the stone. I mean, this was sharp. Like by the time I was basically through my first sentence, because I just keep yammering on. Now it's really, really sharp. So this is ready to go. Just, it's less about technique. It's less about how you're holding the bevel and more about holding the bevel less. That sounds so zen. I feel like Mr. Miyagi here. Because of the suction of that, in this case, Windex on the stone, the less you hold it, the more it's going to hold constant. And just sliding it back and forth with a nice light grip is going to hone this blade entirely. And if I look at my iron, I can see you see that reflection? That's a constant bevel there. There's no little facets. I've got a little spot right there, high up. And actually what that is a heavier scratch pattern. A little bit of a heavier scratch pattern that's probably even heavier than the coarsest stone that I just went to. But you look right at the tip, that is one constant edge. And if you flip it down on the side there, you see how there's zero light reflecting off the edge? There's nothing coming off of this. This is sharp and ready to go. And it's there's no other way to say that. It's just a nice, super light grip. The minute you start to muscle it, you'll actually feel that bevel detach. That's a good word. Detach from the stone. And you are working way too hard at that point. I don't have anything guiding this iron. Let's just see if we can use my fingers as a fence. This is not recommended. You want to have a rabbit here to guide that. But it's cutting, giving me nice shavings with very little effort. Especially into this is almost in grain. The way the grain rises up at the end of this board. It comes up at almost a very steep angle. So I've got practically in grain right on the edge here. You can hear that pitch change as the blade moves off the edge because I'm working in a much harder grain. If I really wanted to demonstrate that, I would put a rabbit in first. So there is the round. That's easy, right? It's a convex edge. It's when we get to the hollow. Actually, let's use this one. I got a bigger blade, it's easier to see. When you get to the hollow, that same technique we just used to roll back and forth doesn't work because now we've got a hollow. I've got to get inside there. So now I need a slightly different tool here. I get no black on my white superfine stone when I don't press it down enough. I really like pressing. White superfine stone. What kind of stone are we talking about here, Mirko? Are you talking a ceramic stone, water stone, oil stone? White superfine doesn't tell me anything. That sounds like an oil stone, but I'm not sure. And yes, I'm using Windex in my bottle. No soapy water. I've used soapy water before. I switched to Windex a while ago, and I like it because it's pretty. Diamond stones require much less pressure than water stones. So everything I'm talking about with a light grip applies doubly with diamond stones. The harder you press on these things, the more they just stop cutting. If you are working on a stone that is nice and light in color and you're not seeing any swarf, then yeah, that could be a bit of an issue. Or that stone could be glazed. I would recommend surfacing that stone to remove any potential glaze. And even if you haven't used it for a really, really long time, it can glaze over. If you haven't cleaned it or surfaced it in a while, swarf can build up, all kinds of nasty stuff can build up, and it essentially petrifies the stone. So you want to come in and reflatten that stone anyway, expose new, fresh, friable fibers if it's a water stone or an oil stone, and you will probably see the swarf marks picking up a lot faster. So here's the issue. We have a concave blade that I cannot do anything with here. I can flatten it, so that's one thing. This is actually a pretty rough iron right now. I chose this one on purpose because I haven't done much with it. It's a size 13. I have a half set of hollows and rounds, so I have all even numbers. I don't have a full set, so I don't have any odd numbers, except this one. I have lucky number 13, and I have yet to use it for any reason. So I've got some restoration work that needs to be done, but I can very quickly just clean up the back and flatten it. This is too narrow to work on my grinding stone, but when I put the 1/4-inch wheel in here, which I thought about doing for this demonstration, but this is the one thing that I don't like doing is changing the stone out on this, because I feel like every time I change the stone, I have to then redress the whole thing and get it, running true again. I don't care how accurate your bushings are. There's a little bit of run out on these old guys. So you've got to true it again. And I don't want to unnecessarily true this and remove a whole bunch of material, which is why I want to get another grinder up and running with that narrow stone. With a 1/4-inch stone though, I can actually come in and get inside there. Again, I'm rounding over the stone, kind of almost grinding it to like a blunt point. And I can now grind away and set my bevel, match the profile, all that fun stuff with the grinder. Once it comes time to hone it though, I can't do that on the stones. So that means I've got to change tools and go to a different approach. And for heavy lifting, and if you don't have a grinder, don't have a narrow grinder, a chainsaw file is really good. Well, this is a chainsaw file specifically for filing a chainsaw. They do make larger radius files like this that I should get one day, because like the instance of this, I mean, there's a lot of work in here. If I had a larger radius, it would work in here. The other thing you can do is grab a dowel that closely matches or slightly tighter radius than the blade is, wrap some coarse grit sandpaper around it and rub the dowel back and forth, and you can grind your bevel. But here is the key. I will put 2 fingers behind the blade like this, so I've got it supported. The tang is nestled into my hand down here, and I'm going to come up and line up the bevel. So essentially, I've got this position so that the bevel is running vertically. And then I come in here with the file, and technically I should only be doing push strokes, but I find that it's a lot easier to hold that bevel angle if I keep the file in contact and I push and pull. I don't know. That's probably my own idiosyncrasy. As long as you're sighting down the bevel, it's actually pretty easy to match that. So I can just continue to take push strokes, but I don't know. I find that the whole thing goes a little bit faster. So as I come up to the edges, I can very easily see the bevel and work in the center of this, but when I come up to the wings, it's a little bit harder to see. So what I do is I rotate the blade in my hand. So now I can see that angle right up to the point. I'm not moving it this way at all. I'm keeping that bevel vertical. I'm just twisting it in order to get better visibility into the wings of this. And this is very similar. This is the grinding process. If you don't have a grinder wheel that will fit in here, this is the exact process you're going to use. Using coarse grit sandpaper and a larger dowel will make the whole thing go faster, and it will give you more unified facets. So that last approach, that last sweep I took with the round iron, I could do that if I have a narrow grinding wheel. I could do that with this guy by actually rotating the file, but that gets to be a little more difficult when you've got a narrow file like this. If you have a larger diameter dowel that will match, it doesn't have to match perfectly, it just has to match closely, you can very easily refine that bevel into one. Eventually you will get kind of the hang of this to the point where you can roll the file. It's hard to do from this angle. I can actually roll the file across the edge, and you can unify any facets. This is actually rasping technique. This is the same technique I use to unify a curve in wood on, like a tight radius bracket foot or something like that. It's the same technique. It's a little bit more dexterity to do it. But here again, what I'm trying to do is get very close. And I've got now an edge that is ground, and I can feel a burr on the back side. So technically this is sharp, right? It's coarsely sharp, but it is sharp. So what I want to do now is refine this and make the edge more durable. To do that, I do need a specialized stone. I have just a water slipstone, just this little pocket guy. These are often sold specifically for carving gouges. And it's got, that radius on the end, and it's got a tighter radius on the other end. And now I can do the exact same process, sighting down the bevel, and I will roll the stone towards me because I can move it off the edge, and then I'll roll the stone away from me so I can move it off the other edge. A lot of times I'll alternate, once towards me, once away from me. And I have to really remind myself to use the entire stone. I tend to get really focused on one little section of the stone. And I've got this 4-inch long stone here, using the whole thing, and the work goes pretty quickly. You do want to keep your fingers away from this edge, obviously. Really focus on holding the iron straight, or holding the iron still, and moving the stone, not the iron. You don't want to try to pull it down the iron. Now again, results may vary. You may find that you're more comfortable moving it down the iron. You might be able to feel the bevel a little bit more. So what I'm saying is not gospel, this is the way you must do it. It's the way that it's most comfortable for me, but I could see some people liking the idea of moving the iron. That might change from radii to radii. So if you find that you're having trouble moving the stone across, try moving the iron. And you can see it's working because it's building up and everything. Very nice. There's my burr. The beauty of this is the iron is still flat on the back, so I come back to my regular old stone, wipe that off the back, and now this is ready, but now I'm going to come back and strop it. So here again, I take the leather, put my finger in the back and essentially push it into that shape. The other reason I say this is thick leather. This is like a 1/4 inch thick because I am running this, I can feel that blade running over my fingertip and I'm relying upon that fingertip to hold that curve. If this were thinner leather, I don't know. I don't think I would cut myself if it were, 1/8 inch or whatever, but I've got some cushion here, so I really don't have to worry about cutting myself. See that burr? We have a burr. And now we have an iron. And this was just stropped. And that looks pretty good, but it's not nearly as polished and shiny as the one I did before. There's the coarser marks there. It's really quite shiny right up at the tip, but the more and more I strop this, the shinier that's going to get as well. But holding that up to the light, I've got no reflection on the edge, so I've got a blade that should be ready to cut. Let me check the chat room real quick. I saw some questions. Yes, Mirko, you're dealing with a waterstone. I would absolutely recommend thoroughly flattening the stone. Take a pencil or something and put a series of hash marks on it, in 2 directions. You've got this hashed grid. Flatten it so that all that pencil is gone. Do it again and remove it again. Then grab some soapy water and like a stiff bristle brush and really scrub that thing and get any of that excess junk that's in there. It's highly possible the stone is glazed, and you will more than likely find that the swarf marks will come up a lot faster in the future because your stone is not dirty or not glazed. Let me just try this real quick. Nope, not enough. A little bit tighter. Hollows and rounds are the most fickle planes. I'm actually using this backwards. The grain's running the wrong way here, but let's try it this way. Here again, do as I say, not as I do. I would not be using this giant number 13 hollow on an edge like this unless I had already prepped it with a rabbet plane. I'm not going to try to create a round, in this instance, a number 13 round off of a square edge. I would come in and create, well, in this case, let's do it. I would create a chamfer with a nice coarsely set rabbet plane. I love the sound of a heavy set plane. Now, this will remove 2 shavings. You know what? Let's get closer. Let's go with a more intimate camera setting. So now with this rabbet here, instead of having just the point, one single eris, I now have 2 erises on the extents of this plane. So, are a sense of, of this geometric plane. So now when I drop the rabbet on, it has 2 points to sit on. Drop the rabbet, what is this thing called? Hollow. It now sits on those 2 arices. I don't know if that's plural or not. And I end up getting 2 shavings because it's cutting this aris and that aris. And it is working its way it's a very awkward body position. Now you'll see those twin shavings merge into one shaving, and what I have is a round. Ta-da! I mean, that's a number 13, so that's quite a wide radius there, but it's a round, and I might be able to pick it up here. See how nice and clean that is? It's actually polished. That is a sharp molding plane. That's what it's supposed to look like. So yeah, we went from a little bit decrepit without using the grinder very quickly to that particular level of sharpness. It would go faster if I had the grinder, certainly, but it's not like that took a real long time to do. So the last thing is taking it one step further and doing a complex profile. This is a thumbnail plane. So let me show you the actual plane itself. It specifically cuts a fillet up at the top and then a multi-radius asymmetrical curve, eccentric curve, not asymmetrical, eccentric curve to create that thumbnail profile. So an ovalo creates a continuous radius curve with a fillet flanking either side of it. This thumbnail only has one fillet. The important thing here, and there is the ovalo iron. So there's the first fillet and the second fillet. So the fillets themselves are straight. You would sharpen those just like you would sharpen any straight iron. So this is a multi-step process. And if you look at this, you can see I've got a bevel right up here where that fillet is, and then a bevel in this curve. This little angle over here, this is not meant to cut. This is essentially a relief point to create that. This is not a cutting edge. So what I have to do is do this in a multi-step process. I have to, on the straight stone, I can create that flat bevel, and this, because it's so narrow, it takes just a couple of seconds. And then I do the same process that I just went through to get under this inside curve using a dowel or using a chainsaw file, or in this particular instance, because this is sharp. It just needs a little bit of honing. I do the same thing with my leather strop. I go straight to the leather strop and I hone it. And then I use a strop on the bench to get that flat where the fillet cuts. So the complex planes, and I've got some weird ones. No, I've got a little ovalos. I like ovalos. No, that's in the other room. Well, the side beads, they can be a good example. The complex planes are the exact same process as we've shown, but it's broken into multiple steps. You've got to sharpen the flats, you've got to sharpen the hollows. Some planes have both hollows and rounds. So you sharpen the rounds the same way that I did that side-to-side motion. You sharpen the hollows using the file or using the dowel, and you sharpen the flats just like you would sharpen a chisel or a plane blade. The difficulty becomes in keeping them all even. If you look at this particular plane, you can see the flat is much higher than the the round. And that's because this plane is meant to be used at a spring angle. It's not used straight up and down, it's used at a spring angle. So that the geometry that comes from that means that this iron looks a little bit funky. But what you have to do is maintain those proportions, which is why you start by doing that tracing. The beauty of this was made by Caleb James, so I didn't have to do that. I've had to do that with some of my older, where's the wedge? I suddenly have a Roy Underhill bench here. There it is. Some of my vintage planes where you get it in place, you get the iron so that it is fairly proud of the sole. That's too much. You don't want it that proud, but for demonstration purposes. If it's sticking out that far, now I can come in here and I can trace the contour of this profile and mark a line on there. And then you can grind it and hone it back to that line. And that's how you maintain those proportions. Once it is sharp, trying to, oh, it never works. Trying to dramatically alter that and going back to coarser and coarser grits is only going to cause trouble, which is why you continue to strop these as long as you possibly can. Because once you start going coarser, now you can actually start removing enough steel that you can throw off the proportions of these. You can throw off the different heights relatively easy just by grinding too much. And you may have to reset the profile at that point, which is why having a strop board like this, where I'm evenly stropping the entire edge all at once. If I come in and I just strop this little fine point here, I'm gonna remove more material. So I usually, what I end up doing is counting my strokes. And then I come in and I do, this is another thing this is strop's good for because of the round edge. I can strop along the edge and I count my strokes there as well to make sure that I'm removing an even-ish amount of steel. If I use my strop board, I'm covering the entire edge and stropping it evenly, maintaining that proportion. The other thing is because I'm using a nice hard wood, there is little flex. There's basically no flex on this board, so you're not gonna get the dubbing effect. I'm not gonna say you're not gonna get it. There's a much decreased dubbing effect on this because it's not a soft, pliable leather. So the answer to the complex irons, honestly, do the work to get them ground first, get them ground correctly the first time. Make your strop board and never grind it ever, 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 ever again. It's just not, it's a pain in the butt. That's the only way I can tell you to do it. Strop boards will absolutely save your life. And you might end up with a drawer full of these guys, but really, I mean, we're not 18th century joiners with 69 molding planes, or maybe you are. God bless you if you are. I don't have stropping boards for my hollows and rounds because you just saw the hollows and rounds are pretty straightforward. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 complex molding planes. 5 of them are side beads. The rest of them are pretty much ovalos. I like ovalos. Well, table edge planes and things like that. Your average 18th century joiner would have 65 molding planes, and they would you'd probably make a new one with every project in order to keep, the missus happy. The lady of the house, literally lady, as in lord and lady, who ordered that particular fine piece of furniture, who's trying to make their piece of furniture nicer than the lord down the street, keeping up with the Joneses. They would specifically order custom moldings for all of their projects, and the cabinet maker would, or probably joiner more than anything, would create that custom plane and at the same time create a stropping board. These things, you'd find these things hanging around in shops of the time. I think I hit them all the crazy blades. Let me make sure I don't have any other questions here. Is the Stanley 55 any good for hollows and rounds? Totally different plane. Combination planes, they do make moldings-ish, but it's not really the same thing. It's closer to a fluting plane or a grooving plane, like a plow plane, because it is a plow plane. The 55 and 45 are plow planes. They work straight up and down. That's how they work. They go perpendicular, if you will, the body of the plane is perpendicular to the surface of the wood. A molding plane is meant to be used at an angle known as a spring angle. You're not doing this. You're doing this. It's a very different process, and it allows you to create those profiles on the edge of a board. You really can't do that with a 55 because that's not the way it cuts. It's a different plane. It is a plow plane. It is not a molding plane. It's also not a side escapement plane. Well, yeah, a little bit. It's a different bird altogether. If you need to do fluting, what's the opposite of fluting? Beating. That's what it's called. Fluting or beating, that's what it's for. And rabbets. It's not really meant to be a molding plane. Supplier for blank irons and wooden rabbets and dado planes. Lee Nielsen's the one that I know just about everybody uses. The key is the irons are tapered. They're not the same thickness all the way out throughout, but at the same time, if you really want, I mean, that's my limited experience making these things. Talk to a guy like Caleb James or reach out to Phil Edwards. The guys that are actually making these planes now, they'll tell you where they're getting their irons. Most of them are getting them from Lee Nielsen. If you happen to take off too much steel, is it better to change the plane shape or grind it again? I would say grind it again. It depends on the plane. If it is an isolated profile, if it's an ovalo, that in other words is not a pair. Hollows and rounds are a matched pair. So if you grind the profile of one hollow, you need to grind the profile of the matching round to make sure that you're getting them. Otherwise, you end up with beads and coves that are not in sync. They're not the same radii. So it'd be easier to regrind the iron. I still would say regrind the iron, even if it's like a weird one-off plane, because when you grind the iron, it's just a little bit of iron. Changing the sole is the whole sole. And not only does it have to be over this distance, it has to be absolutely consistent from one end to the other. And you can use a dowel to slide back and forth in there, coarse grit sandpaper to do it. Then you can use something, a corner of a block or something in order to refine those fillets. But it's still a lot more work than it would be just to regrind the iron. So I would recommend regrinding the iron. If the sole is flat, and even then, there's going to be a little bit of movement because they're wooden planes. If the sole is in good shape, I leave it alone. In fact, that's one of my walkaway points when I'm buying a vintage plane. If I look at it and go, geez, that's really beat up, I generally walk away. At least in my area, there are molding planes everywhere. Just even look at the guys online. Everybody's got molding planes, especially these complex things. If the sole's in good shape, leave it alone. It's a lot more work to try to do that. If you do have to change the sole of a hollow and round, I'm sure I'm getting this right. Yes, do the hollow first, and then you can use the hollow to shape the round. You could do it the other way around, but it's a little bit harder. Just like I was trying to put the cove on the edge of a board, because the hollow is going to conform to this a lot easier. To a flat surface has got two reference points. Do the hollow first and use that to create the round. Plane makers have something called a mother plane that is used to shape the soles of all the other planes they make. So if they make a whole bunch of ovalo planes, they've created an ovalo plane with a reverse profile. What's it called? Yeah, a reverse image of the profile. And they use that plane to plane the shape of all of the ovalo planes they're making from there on out. So it's the same idea where you took the hollow first and use that as the mother to create the match. And if you wanted to make a whole bunch of that particular size, then you would use that mother plane for all of those. There are lots of modern makers for molding planes. Matt Bickford at MS Bickford Planes, Phil Edwards at Philly Planes. Who did I just mention? Caleb James. I think his business is just called Caleb James. I'm missing a bunch. Who's the guy? Red Rose. Thank you. Goodness gracious. I was going to kick myself if I forgot him. Red Rose Productions actually made this cock bead plane, little tiny cock bead plane for me. Yeah, Don't forget Old Street Tools, the original Clark & Williams guys. Like when I started in this, there was just Clark & Williams. It was called Clark & Williams then, not Old Street Tools. They were the only ones, and they were backlogged for like 7 years, and you had to have a special invitation. Today is great. We've got all kinds of modern makers out there doing it. So yeah, look up molding planes on Instagram and you'll find a whole bunch of them. It's fantastic. They are not cheap though. They're labor intensive to make. So it's liable, you're gonna probably see getting, spending several $100s, if not sometimes $600 on a couple of molding planes. Yeah, they're not cheap things to make. Have you ever thought of putting a rounded strop wheels on hand crank grinder to speed up the process? Yes, I have a Tormek and I've done that. I also have and right now it's not set up for that, but I have a small buffing wheel. Right now it's actually set up for polishing for turned items, but I have 2 hard wheels that screw onto this that have rouge and white diamond on them, and they are great. It's a real easy way to do it. I don't keep this guy out because honestly, speed up what process? I didn't like curtail anything. I didn't, cut to the end and pull the baked turkey out of the oven. What you saw me do tonight is the entire process. So stropping is like a 10 to 20 second process. So where I end up doing this, I use this a lot for turning gouges because they're high-speed steel, and the steel is just so much harder. These vintage guys, nice soft steel on them. They really don't require that much effort to strop. And if you find that you're doing a heck of a lot of stropping and not getting anywhere, you probably haven't done the proper work on the coarser grit things enough. You're not going to try to remove a huge scratch pattern on a really, really fine strop. You could speed up the process and do that, but what you're also going to do is increase the chances of dubbing. Because once the wheel is turning, then you'll find you may have a little bit more trouble holding that angle straight. Certainly you want to make sure the wheel's turning away from you, not toward you, or you will you'll end up with these little ribbons of leather shooting out as you essentially turn a smaller and smaller wheel. So that's the other thing, is if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that it's turning away from you, the proper direction, and a buffing wheel will generally do that. A grinder, if you put a wheel on there, you need to make sure it's a reversible grinder. Very key point. What's his name? Chuck Bender does that with all his carving gouges. I took a carving class with Chuck years ago, and that's what he does that's how he strops all of his carving gouges. He's got a big old grinder set up in the corner of the shop, flip it into reverse mode, done, and goes back to work. I didn't really do any carving gouges. Honestly, carving gouges would be the same as a hollow or a round until you get into the really weird ones like backbent spoon gouges and stuff, and that tends to be done the same way I would do a complex molding iron. It's really the same process there. I know I missed some further up. I apologize if I missed your question. Mirko, you've got a couple questions in here that unfortunately, as I'm missing them out of context, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. And that stays flat after 10 reflattenings? Yes. Again, the strop is really so fine. It is refining a surface, not creating a surface. So it is really hard to take an edge out of shape with a strop. It's the biggest thing that people freak out about the strop, and they think, oh my God, I'm not holding the exact bevel angle. That's what's great about a strop, is you don't have to. The pliability of the leather conforms to the edge and it will work just fine. But I'm removing so little steel. In fact, I almost don't even think of it as removing steel. I'm not really, certainly you get, the staining. This was recently just, new stuff was applied. But you can see the dark streaks where I removed it. Obviously there's steel being removed, but I almost think of it as like, you know, squeezing the steel together rather than abrading it away. It's not really creating scratch marks. It's kind of smudging the steel together more than anything else. It's so fine that it's just really not, it's not going to throw anything out of flat. How you deglaze diamond stones is with soap and water and a stiff bristle brush. If you've got like a wire bristle brush, the key to that, like anything, is keep it clean. If you have an extra coarse diamond stone, it's because the stone itself is not friable. So the diamonds are not breaking away. All that happens is the swarf gets down into the diamond and it doesn't come out. On a water stone, you can reflatten the sucker and it just gives you a nice clean face. It cleans away all the stone, all the swarf and everything. A diamond stone won't do that. So you've got to use soap and water, or if it's really bad, you can use, you know, something like Gooby Gone or something a little bit more, not abrasive, a more nuclear option, to the same thing you would use to like remove rust. And really grind the sucker with a stiff bristle brush. It's diamond. You're not going to screw it up with a brush. You're going to shorten the life of the brush, but you have to clean it in order to do that. I had an extra coarse or an extra coarse diamond stone for a while. Never used the thing anymore. I gave it to somebody else. But I used it a couple times and didn't clean it right away, and that sucker glazed over right away. It actually rusted. The whole thing turned brown. If your stone starts to take on like a reddish cast, you got to clean that thing. So yeah, deglazing is just heavy duty cleaning. All right, well, we've gone on an hour and a half, so I think I will call it a night here. But no, I don't use the Charlesworth method. I do not. I don't put rulers against anything. I don't see the point. And David Charlesworth is a much better woodworker than me, so obviously it works. It's just, to me, it's an extra step. It's not necessary. No back bevels, no ruler tricks, none of that stuff. Sharpening to me is keep it as simple as possible. What you saw is what I do tonight. The skewed irons and the spokeshave blades is the exact same presses used for my straight irons and my plain blades. It's a couple seconds on a stone, you know, a couple seconds on a strop, sometimes just go straight to the strop. It's not really necessary to do anything else. So cool. Everybody have a great night. If I missed your questions, I apologize. Please feel free to ask it again in the comments of this video and I will do my best to answer it there. Otherwise, come back next time. Next time, I think I'm going to talk specifically about finishing. I've had a couple questions about finishing. I need a little bit more time to prepare a finishing demo because obviously drying time, it's something hard to do live, but certainly we can talk about finishing. There's another thing that people overthink and make too difficult. So hopefully we can simplify that a little bit.